Good evening, this is Angela with Parker's Permaculture. It is a beautiful summer evening here in Portland, Oregon. It actually feels summery. I spent the morning working on painting my greenhouse and I got quite sunburned, but this evening I'm hanging out in the shade here, just enjoying the cool evening breeze and resting my feet for a few minutes and sitting in the rocker here. So I thought that I would take a few minutes to discuss a concept that kind of makes the rounds of social media every few months. It's something that has a lot of merit to it on one level, but perhaps is imperfect. So when we are looking at concepts in permaculture, we want to have highly effective design that helps build resilient communities. So we can have these very well-intentioned sentiments, but when we go to apply them in real life, we find that actually the design is not effective. And we can have all of the good wishes and good intentions, but if we don't get actual results from our design, it's not actually making our communities more robust and healthier and more resilient. So I thought we would talk about this kind of concept. It gets broken down into memes. It gets reposted in gardening groups and homesteading groups and permaculture groups. And it is this notion that gardening must be taught in school, and that if only our children were to learn these kind of basic how to grow your own food skills in school, that would make folks more self-sufficient and that would solve some of our problems in society. So I don't know if you are familiar with a YouTuber called Boy in a Band. He is in England and my kids love him. I'm actually really partial to a song he has called Don't Stay in School, and it's not an anti-school song at all. It is a song, I highly recommend you go watch it. It's a song about all of the kind of useless things that we teach in school that are not practical and applicable to our real lives, and how we, for some reason as a society, have devalued daily life skills and information that would serve us in our real adult lives. It's a wonderful critique of the kinds of things we choose to teach in public schools and the kinds of things that we decline to teach in public schools. And that for many of us, we kind of have to stumble around in our first adult years until we figure out how to do these things. So I encourage you to go watch it. So when folks are saying we should be teaching kids how to grow food, absolutely, but there are only so many hours in the day, only so much energy and so much funding. So what is it that we are going to be removing that is perhaps extraneous or unnecessary or actually not relevant at all to kids' lives in order to add in gardening? And what will that look like? What is the good permaculture design to implement gardening in schools? So my husband is a public school special education teacher. He has a specialty in mathematics and he teaches at the high school level. So we're very familiar with public education. We strongly believe in public education, even though we are unschoolers. And for our personal family, that was not the best choice to put our kids in public school. Much like permaculture is site-specific design, education is specific to the child, and not every educational format or philosophy works for every single child. And so while we believe that public education fills a need for many kids, and obviously it fills a need for the greater society, we went a different route with our kids because they had different needs. And each of our kids' educational journeys looks very, very different. So when we're talking about adding gardening to the public education curriculum, I helped run a school garden. My husband has helped run school gardens in the past. I think absolutely kids need to be able to get their hands in the dirt. Kids need to be able to learn how to garden, how to grow their own food. When we ran a garden for a food bank organization in East Portland, I loved having kids volunteer in the garden. I had free workshops for families with kids. We had kids who volunteered alongside their parents. It is amazing how a child may be served a cherry tomato on a plate at the dinner table and they will not touch it. But if they can go pick it off the vine when it's warmed in the sun, they will eat fistfuls of cherry tomatoes. There is something about being able to connect with the plant growing out of the earth, harvesting it with your own hands and eating it, that just speaks to our soul. It is so appealing to us on such a really core level, right? It speaks to something deep inside of us. And I feel that kids can just get so much out of that experience. So I'm hugely pro school gardens. I'm hugely pro community gardens. there are a couple of issues with saying like it's the responsibility of teachers and the responsibility of schools to teach kids how to grow food. So the first issue is having a husband who is a public education teacher. You may be aware of this if you are here in the United States. Public education is terribly underfunded. Teachers are not paid well. They do not have a good retirement package. They don't have that great a health care. And teachers are often burdened with a lot of things besides their specialty, besides the thing they have trained for. Teachers have to do a lot of social work activities. They have to deal with behavioral management, help kids with a lot of trauma, a lot of difficult home situations. So much of my husband's job is managing kind of the basic needs of kids who don't get their basic needs met at home. And that makes it very difficult to then find the time or space or to help the kids cultivate the mental space, the ability to learn an academic subject, right? So when we're talking about telling kids that they need to learn to grow their own food and that the schools should handle this, what are we really asking for? Are we asking for our overburdened public education teachers to take on one more task that they are likely not going to be paid for, likely have inadequate resources for, and likely have insufficient backup and help to make this program successful? Our local school garden sits pretty darn neglected in our neighborhood. So we can have really good intentions with saying schools need to have a school garden. What is that actually going to look like? How's that going to be funded? And I don't mean just the money to put in the raised beds. How's it going to be funded long term? What is the employment power associated with that? Who in the workforce is going to run that program? I don't know if you're aware of this, but teachers are paid for the days that they work. While they are considered salaried, spring break, winter break, summer are unpaid furloughs for teachers. Everyone seems to think teachers get a lot of vacation time and therefore that's okay to not pay them very much. But teachers don't actually get that paid vacation. It is unpaid vacation. So when you're looking at adding more burdens to our teachers, I'd like us to really think about how we fund education in America. And when we just keep heaping more and more and more things on teachers who are already working in a climate where they fear for their lives on a regular basis, where school shootings happen, speeders are out, street races in Portland are a problem. We're already looking at a school situation where teachers are working in a hazardous condition, but not getting hazard pay for it, not getting compensation for it, where the trauma that they're having to manage for themselves and their students, where the workload that they're having to manage is really, really onerous and the compensation is really minimal. What are we asking for when we're asking that teachers take on an additional burden of teaching our kids how to grow their own food? So I think about what is the funding. And when we're looking at permaculture design, we're looking to design from patterns to details. We're looking at the connections in all things. So if we're saying let's add another layer to what we're asking teachers to teach in schools, let's follow that all the way down the rabbit hole. And it's going to lead us to looking at how we fund public education in the first place, how we value or devalue teachers in the first place, and what we are asking them to do and whether it is realistic and whether we are actually going to make the systemic changes in public education to make it possible for school gardens to thrive. So I mentioned earlier, our local school garden basically sits completely neglected and it is locked all summer long. Despite the fact that our local school is public property, and believe me, I have talked with the local service district about this multiple times, there's a basketball court, there's playgrounds. When we first moved to this neighborhood, our kids would go play on the playground there in the summer. It's now all behind chain link fences and it's locked. School garden locked in the summer. It's because they don't want unsavory characters on school property. And so a public resource that is funded by all of our tax dollars is inaccessible for the residents of my neighborhood, including the low-income residents who would perhaps love to utilize the school gardens. The neighborhood kids who would love to be able to play basketball on the blacktop in the summer. They can't. We don't have that resource available to us. And that leads me to my other main point of this video, which is if we are going to have school gardens, especially here in the Pacific Northwest, the bulk of the food that comes out of a garden comes out in the summer when school is out of session. So who's going to manage that? Who's going to water the garden? Who's going to tend to it? Who's going to harvest it? And how will the harvest be distributed? Are we asking teachers to work during their unpaid furlough days to manage a school garden? When my husband taught at a Native American school here in Portland, they had a wonderful way of harvesting and dispensing the produce, especially to the elders in the community. But they made meals once a week when they had culture night and all kinds of cultural activities, and there would be a free dinner. And they would use food out of the gardens, and excess produce would be distributed to the elders in the community. And that was a wonderful way to use the school garden. But you had a whole community that was designed in a way that was much more effective and sought to meet the needs of the children and the elders in the community, that operated differently than other public schools do because it was very community minded. So if we're looking at making those changes to our school gardens, if we're looking at making those systemic changes to our schools, perhaps we should look to effective community models, effective people care models, if we're going to think about what is the system that we are going to have for harvesting and distributing of produce when it's not the school year. So I'm not saying that teachers shouldn't teach gardening. I'm not saying that in any way we shouldn't learn how to grow our own food. I'm absolutely saying kids should learn how to grow their own food. Absolutely saying that is a crucial part of childhood that so many children are denied. And that when you cultivate a love of gardening, a love of growing your own food, a love of cooking with and eating and enjoying whole foods that you harvested with your own hands, you are instilling something deep and special and profound in kids that will shape their whole life going forward. They will carry those memories, and perhaps that will be the seed of something in their life that helps them push toward sustainability, push toward building resilient communities, shapes their thinking going forward, and perhaps their eating practices going forward, and perhaps the way they view caring for their community and their land going forward. So I'm not in any way saying we shouldn't teach gardening in school. I am saying making these posts is an oversimplification. And if we're just going to post on Facebook and say problems of our society would be solved, food insecurity would be solved if we could just teach kids how to grow food in school. What are we really asking for? What funding changes, what systemic changes do we need in the way that we run public education, particularly here in the United States, in order to make that a viable option in public school? So thank you for watching today. I hope you will join me back in my permaculture garden later this week. It's supposed to be real hot and sunny, but I have a lot happening in the garden in late June. We are going to take a few days during our heat wave that is anticipated and go hiking in the mountains, and fingers crossed I will have a video from that as well. So in the interim, check out my Patreon down below, and I'll be back really soon. Thanks.